The sight is as staggering as it is devastating. A transmission tower in Avondale snapping in Hurricane Ida's winds. The twisted wreckage afterwards. The power lines, lifelines to the entire metro New Orleans area dunked into the Mississippi River. New Orleans City Council President Helena Moreno put the scene in perspective.
What I find unfortunate is that so often it takes something like this for changes to be made.
Entergy Louisiana CEO Philip May said the 400-foot tower that fell was robustly engineered and had just been inspected, but simply could not take the power of Ida.
Those towers, all of those towers, went through Hurricane Katrina without wavering. But this wind event experienced much higher wind fields, much more devastating wind to those structures into our system than even Katrina.
But the catastrophic transmission failure Entergy says it experienced is more than this one tower and more than the corridor it's a part of, which feeds electricity from a larger regional power grid through this point at Avondale on the West Bank and onto the East Bank of Jefferson Parish at Harahan. May said all 8 transmission corridors that transmit power from the outside world into Metro New Orleans all failed. That leaves the entire area from St. Charles Parish in the west to the Twin Spans in the east and down the coast through St. Bernard and Plaquemines isolated with no power. Entergy even calls it an island. But May says Entergy cannot commit to a timeline. Moreno expects it could take several weeks.
I just want to be very honest with the people of New Orleans. I got off the phone with the Entergy engineers earlier today, and they told me that the assessment alone of the transmission failures, that alone could take up to 4 days. So up to 4 days of just assessing the damage before it could be repaired.
After the assessment, Entergy crews and contractors will work along 2 tracks, trying to get one of the 7 remaining transmission lines back up and running, or generating power from within the island itself, using the power station at 9 Mile Point, or by firing up the new power plant at Michoud in New Orleans East.
Also, can we get a line coming in from 9 Mile, one of the lines fixed here, and then potentially get 9 Mile powering New Orleans along with the New Orleans power station in New Orleans East? That would provide us over 600 megawatts of power in the city of New Orleans, our own little off-the-grid self-power generation to keep us afloat. This won't make us perfect.
Let's give an idea. 600 megawatts is enough for essentially emergency services and things like that, critical services, not necessarily to power everybody's house.
You got
right?
it.
The New Orleans City Council regulates Entergy, allowing it to charge customers for the costs of a new power plant in New Orleans East and for hardening its towers and utility poles. May said that's been money well spent.
Every time we build a new line, it's built to a higher standard. It's using different engineered structures, things that would be able to withstand, 150-mile-an-hour winds, that kind of thing. More robust foundations and so forth, so they can't be pushed over by the wind. And that's really where the improvements in infrastructure have been taking place.
But the complete failure of the transmission system in Ida makes Moreno wonder.
But for all 8 to fail, I just think that I'm just wondering whether this could have been prevented, and that's what we're going to be looking into. So yes, the focus is on absolute restoration. That is what we're all about right now, but more will follow with investigations and getting to the bottom of how this happened and what can be done better by the company.
Now, I've gotten questions from several viewers wondering why Entergy doesn't just fire up the new Orleans power station at Michoud that we talked about, the new plant that customers are still paying for. And you may recall that Entergy used paid actors to lobby the city council to let them build that plant and promoted it by saying it would let them make power on an island. That's the quote that they used. But now that we are an island, Entergy spokeswoman Lee Sabatini said they still need the transmission lines to be restored to be able to deliver the power from the New Orleans power station in Michoud to the rest of the city.
So basically, David, we're cut off.
Exactly. The island is a perfect metaphor for this. It's something that we should be able to deal with. It's something that these transmission lines should be hardened to deal with, and they are not able to withstand this, and they all failed at once. So now there's this process on 2 tracks, one to try to restore the ability to bring in power from the outside, and the other to try to figure out if they can create power inside the island.
Look at that damage to that tower. That is unreal when you look at it.
It was staggering, and to hear Philip May talk about how this was a highly engineered 400-foot tower that they had just inspected within the last year and felt was strong and robust and had made it through all these previous storms. Now, it is kind of on the western side of things, closer to the eye wall, did take very, very high winds, but obviously, you know, whatever. And the other point that he made was they get money from these additional assessments that Entergy customers pay to harden their infrastructure, but they're not going to go and harden something that is already, in their estimation, at its strongest, most robust, able to take on high winds up to 150 miles an hour, but here it did not sustain.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, it looks like it seems almost obvious that that was going to crumble given the damage
to it. It looks mangled.
To it.
Really, it just looks very mangled instead of just like it tipped over.
And I have to say that it's extremely rusty. I was there right next to it. You can see the rust on it. So again.
And when was this built?
I'm not sure when it was first installed, but he said that it was inspected within the last year and passed that inspection. The question is, should it have been hardened? Should it have been upgraded? If you look at the rust on it, is that a factor in it? And that's all going to go into the investigation of how all these systems failed. And to keep in mind, that's only one of the 8 entry points. All the other 8 entry points failed, not by toppling over like this one, but they all failed to be able to deliver the power in from the outside world. That's that MISO network that you hear about, or you might have heard about. It's kind of the mid-continent group that sends power in from the middle of the United States down to us when we need it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like the regulating sort of overhead group.
Exactly.
That watches out for the power.
And it's a sharing system. When something is needed, they would send it from those other areas to us. But it's a moot point because we could not receive it because all of these 8 points failed.
Well, let's hope that they ask some tough questions about it, because this really is going to be the disaster after the disaster, this power situation. It is, you know, it can bring a city to a halt as it is right now. Exactly.
This is going to be the key to being able to restore all the city services, and it's not just the city. Again, it is the whole metro area south of Lake Pontchartrain, essentially.
All right. I mean, right now we have the hospitals affected, we have the airport affected, we have all of those key critical infrastructure pieces that are at a standstill. So anyway, thank you, David, for that report, and I'm sure you're going to have more in the coming days.
Absolutely.